Welcome to the Business School, and for some of you, welcome to Leeds. My name is John March. I work here, not very much actually, part-timer, but I teach strategic management, and I've spent many hours in this room doing just that. Happy hours? Many hours in this room doing that. Welcome to you all. We've got a disparate constituency this evening of some friends, some colleagues, alumni, students, undergraduates, and also postgraduates. You're most welcome. This is the last in the series, the Corporate Wisdom series, and delighted to be able to welcome Fred Burt, who is here, is going to be making the presentation this evening. So, I met Fred by chance 6 months ago, perhaps, 8 months ago, perhaps, and I suppose it was kind of proof of the airport lounge theory of history, which is, things don't happen necessarily in a very planned way, but also a kind of random way. And we happened to meet through a friend of a friend, and the occasion was a jazz concert. I'm going to a jazz concert, if you remember. The evening was good. It was a bit of a blur, as I recall. The young crowd, the young metropolitan crowd in London was very strong in evidence. And what I do remember about it was some unfeasibly narrow black jeans that everyone wore with very bright spectacles. That was my principal memory of it. What we've got is a presentation from Fred on brands, a kind of key business topic, and it's something which I talk about and teach in my subject, and it often this evening brings uncomfortable realization, perhaps, of the limits of knowledge about what that concept really means, and Fred is here really to interrogate that and to help us out with it. Just in terms of the format this evening, Fred can introduce himself and his professional background and what he's going to talk about. Our time is up at 7 o'clock. So Fred, you'll be about 40 minutes, you said. There'll be a bit of interaction as we go through. And then there'll be some questions and answers. And at 7, there's some refreshments outside, and you'll be able to follow up any questions you don't manage to ask Fred at the end there. So, without any further ado, Fred.
Thank you, John. So, well, look, a few introductory words from me. Very excited to be here tonight. Thank you for having me. My name is Fred Burt. I'm the founder of Olix Consulting. I'm a brand consultant. Being a brand consultant is a blessing and a curse. It has meant that I have worked in the world of intangible assets, fascinating assets, constantly changing landscapes, and in and around a topic that lots of business folk don't understand well enough. And it's interesting and exciting to have been in that space all my career. It's given me the great privilege of working with companies like IBM, AT&T, SAP, Siemens, Philips. Unit 4, I have to say, to keep me honest, I have one of my clients in the room here this evening. Isaac, thank you for joining us here tonight. So you can ask him at the end whether what I said is absolutely true or not. Actually, ask him if he's putting it into practice. Maybe that's the question we should be asking. So it's been a huge blessing, but it's also been a curse because no matter how many times I explain what I do for a living to my parents, they still don't understand it. So it's this world of intangibles kind of affects me personally as well. And so when we're talking about the demystification of the world of brands, I wish my dad was in the room tonight because it would do him a lot of good as well. It was indeed, John, a cold February night when we met. I look back at my email, and John, before the main act came on, asked me what I did for a living, and I think it was over one too many pints of Red Stripe, and I was on a bit of a mission. And I said, I'm in the world of brands, and they're misunderstood, and they're not properly appreciated, and they're hugely valuable for businesses. And everywhere that I walk, I find senior business people who don't fully appreciate the value of the brands they have, how they work, how they deliver business value to their businesses. And these are catastrophically leveraged, under-managed, and John said, yes. Look, I'm not interested. We're here to listen to some music. But I do know some people, some super smart, super intelligent people who would be interested, that's you by the way, who would be interested in this topic. So why not come up to Leeds and you can continue your rant when you come up. So no Red Stripe tonight and no bar to be thumping, but we will be tackling the topic of brands in a number of ways. What we won't be talking about tonight is a kind of how-to. So I love talking about how to build brands. I do it for a living. I could talk all night and into the morning. And in fact, we probably wouldn't leave until Sunday afternoon if we started down that path. So what we are going to talk about are some basic principles. What are brands? How do they work? And how do they deliver business value? And this is what I enjoy most, is when I start to have a conversation with a CEO and he thinks, oh my God, it's colouring in and fluffiness and everything like that. And by the end of the conversation, he goes, oh my God, I've got a multi-billion-dollar asset that I'm not managing properly. So we'll start to talk along those lines today. You're all looking quite alert. Anyone spending too much time on their phone, I'll be quizzing you particularly, or on the screen. Of course, you're taking notes, I know that as well. So stay alert. We will need your participation as we go along this evening. You have already participated as well. Thank you to those of you who completed the survey that we sent out, that Sean sent out as well. We've got some quite interesting findings, and I will be benchmarking you on one particular question against the alumni of Procter & Gamble, who I asked exactly the same question to. So you can see whether you are indeed as super smart and super switched on as John said you were going to be this evening. That's all the preamble that I had. Let's get to it. So I warned you that you were going to be participating, and right from the outset, it's over to you guys. Brands. What are we talking about tonight? Can someone give me a definition of a brand, please? Someone in the room. Come on. Please don't give me silence at this point. This could get awkward.
I think you said it earlier, intangible asset.
Intangible asset. Anyone going to build on intangible asset? I've got to go out shopping tomorrow. I need some intangible assets. Anyone else? Something recognizable. I'm in serious demand of some recognition in my wardrobe. I've got to go out and get something that I can actually recognize. Come on, we can do better than that. Something you can trust. Interesting. Trustworthiness, recognition, valuable assets. Anyone else?
Experience.
An experience. An experience.
With a company and its product.
An experience with a company and its product. And not just the product itself, is that what I'm saying? But it's something more than that. That's interesting. At the back, sir?
Doesn't always have to be a logo.
Does it always
Have to be a logo.
Is that a question or is that a...
No, it doesn't always
It doesn't always have to be a logo. That is, yeah, it could be a variety of things. So at the back, yes.
Something that distinguishes a product or a service from another product.
Something that something, we'll come back to the something, but the issue of distinguishability, distinction from one thing to another. Very good. Anything else?
It's the way we relate to each other.
The way we relate
To each other.
the way we relate to each other. That's a big one. Can you
So,
give me...
like, organisations are meant to serve society.
Yeah.
So, a brand represents the way in which they do that.
Right, okay, so there's some sort of interface or interaction going on. That's quite interesting as well. Madam at the back, yes.
The look and feel and tone of voice or something.
I beg your pardon?
The look and feel and tone of voice.
Look, feel, tone of voice, yes. Isaac, we know all about that, don't we? Absolutely. Well, look, lots of stuff. We could go. I'm glad you're all participating in this. So the reason there are so many different perspectives on this are that this is not really well defined. So here is the American Marketing Association's definition of a brand, and it's nonsense. It's a name, term, design symbol, or any other feature that identifies one seller's good or service as distinct from those of other sellers. That's a definition of a trademark, not of a brand. You've talked about a whole load more than just the logo or the symbol. So you brought that up at the back. So you one step ahead of the American Marketing Association, and absolutely right. So it's curious that we all know that brands are important in the world. We think about them in a general sense. John, you said as much from a business point of view, but even definitions are hard to pin down. And in part that's the challenge, in part that's the fascination. Certainly why I get involved. Because it's not this, as we've already heard. It's not the logo, it's not the name, and it's not the advertising, or certainly not only the advertising. I like to think of brands being an idea that's kind of shaped much more by the total experience. So if you think about Starbucks, for example, yes, they have their advertising. They don't do an awful lot of it, but they do advertising. But they have a very strong culture that they're proud of. Little smileys on the cups that you get. It's perhaps not as consistent as it might be, but it is what it is. Products and services, of course, often overlooked amazingly. The product itself, you would be surprised. I'll share an anecdote at the end on that one. They've just signed a licensing deal with Nestle, so they are going to be distributing products through retailers, not just through their own channels now. So we will see more and more Starbucks going on. And of course, the environments. So the stores themselves, you go into a Starbucks to experience it. Who said experience? I think you mentioned, oh no, that's right, yes. Mrs. Halifax there mentioned environments as well. Very important for the Starbucks experience. And you can map pretty much any brand, and we'll talk about what are and what aren't brands as well, in these kind of terms. And I think what becomes interesting when you start to think about the picture that you have of the brands, it is made up of more than just the advertising and the communications. It's more sort of 360 degrees. But that's just the start. So that's how it's built. It's of course, with Starbucks, it's that experience contributes to something that we value and that we're prepared to pay a premium for. I think rationally, everyone in the room will be able to identify where they could go for an equally good cup of coffee that would be half the price, and yet we still do it. And of course, increasingly today, this is the experience that brand owners aren't solely in control of. So we can shape it as brand owners to an extent, but we can't rely on it being something that's entirely in our control. So poor old Starbucks is a regular victim of consumer activism for all sorts of reasons. And they're pretty good at responding, but they've got 40,000 stores to respond through, and it's quite a task to do that. And this is where it gets interesting, because when you start to think about how all these externalities impact us as individuals, whether we're consumers, whether we're customers, making a distinction there if you're thinking about B2B, whether we're voters, making choices between the options that we have. Really what's happening here is that the experience contributes to meaning and a picture in the mind, a sort of aggregate picture in our mind. So it's very much a sort of psychological construct as well that we need to be thinking about. And that meaning contributes to the value. And it contributes in three very sort of general senses. First of all, in the choices that we make. This is a word I'll come back to a bit later, about the choice. Do I engage? Do I not? Do I choose A over B? Choice. Do I pay a premium for that choice? Starbucks, for example. I'm choosing that. There may be a cheaper option, but I'm going to choose Starbucks for all sorts of complex reasons. And then loyalty. Having chosen it, would I stay with it? I think Apple is a great loyalty brand. People will buy Apple products almost in spite of some of the things that they do. So loyalty is a big factor. So it's a sort of benefit, if you like, of that meaning that we're building. So choice, premium, loyalty, and we'll come back to choice because I think that's the first amongst equals there as we think about that. Now, about 8 years ago, an enterprising consultant called Cheryl Burgess interviewed a very bright, talented brand consultant and asked him for his opinion on brands and all sorts of things. And that particular consultant gave her his definition of a brand, which I like. And I like it for its simplicity. A brand is a reason to choose. So this word choice comes in there. And what I like about that, it's not about preference, it's not about an intent, it's about an action. And if you think about it from a business owner's point of view, if there is no action, whether that's purchasing, subscribing, voting, renewing, attending, or, it's great everyone registered to attend, but not everyone attended. The choice to attend is a choice. If that choice isn't being made, then it's kind of academic what's happening before it. So a reason to choose, I like this definition. And there's a particular reason I also like this definition, because it's my definition. Cheryl Burgess has become, she's a lovely woman, by the way, so this is not by design or any malicious intent, but she's managed to get the attribution of that quote to her on the internet. So tonight, formally, where's the camera? Cheryl, I'm sorry, I'm taking it back. Fred Burt, copyright. So no, Cheryl's very nice. She will totally understand. But I do, this reason to choose is something that I think is a very helpful way of kind of thinking about brands. You have an audience, they have choices, you can help them make the choice that is you can help them make the right choice, and so on and so forth. So we're going to interrogate that question of choice in a second. Because I think when we start to think about the psychological state here of us as subjects, as individuals, and choice making, we tend to think, well, that's great, because I'm an entirely rational creature. I look at all the factors that are an option, and if I've got two like products here, of equal quality, from equal reputation, and one's a bit more expensive than the other one, I'll buy the cheaper one, because that's rational behaviour. That's what I do, don't I? Don't I? Well, unfortunately, we've got some evidence that suggests the opposite, which we'll come on to in a minute, for those of you that carried out the survey. Because, I mean, our orthodox way of thinking, certainly from an economics point of view, for you as students of business, is that a lack of choice is bad. Monopolies are sort of some kind of market failure. They can result in inefficiencies and even sort of abuse of monopolistic power. So lack of choice, that's a bad thing, surely. And it's not just an economic phenomenon. Lack of choice is a bad thing in all sorts of ways. And with apologies to any Russians in the audience, so, our sort of way of thinking of choice is that we need options in order for markets and for democracy and for society to be functioning. So our ability to exercise choice is a kind of foundational part of this, this thing that's going on and in which brands kind of operate. So, choice is a good thing. That's the kind of pre-condition that kind of sets up brands as a reason to choose. But let's think about that. Is choice always a good thing? What does that really mean? A few years ago, there was a guy called Barry Schwartz who wrote this book called The Paradox of Choice. Has anyone read this or heard of this? In essence, what he's saying is that we do like choice to a point. There's a point where too much choice is actually problematic, and psychologically, it triggers an effect where we essentially disengage with the whole process and sort of cognitively shut down. Because think of what happens when you walk into something like that. That is a visual representation of what they call cognitive overload. It is close to impossible to imagine walking down those aisles and actually shopping in a way that everyone in this room would imagine shopping. And we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? Just think about the experience that you have walking to any supermarket in the UK. What's the first thing that you walk into as you walk through the doors? We've probably all got pretty much the same picture of the fresh produce, either large or small or nicely done or not, whatever it may be. It's fresh produce. You walk round the back, there's the dairy section, refrigerators. You walk along there, you pop your head down the toiletries aisle and see whether you need something along there, possibly skip it, then into the biscuit section and maybe where the soft drinks are at the back and round, and you pay. Yeah? Does that sort of sound kind of familiar to you? That is a mental map that we take into the supermarket every time we go there, and it means that we deselect 90% of the products that are in there. I haven't mentioned pet food, by the way. Of the people in the room here who don't have pets, when was the last time you saw pet food in the supermarket? There's a reason for that. They are designed so you don't go past the pet food section. there is no discretionary spend on pet food for you as a consumer if you don't have a pet. There's no impulse, but oh, I quite fancy some pedigree chum if you don't have a dog. Supermarkets know this. They design that flow very, very clearly and very carefully. And then within each section, they know exactly how to get you to that section and how to get you to shop, to trade in, to trade up, to trade across. That is P&G language, by the way, at a category level, so that you go in there thinking you're going to spend £2 on a razor and you come out with a £12 shaving regimen that every man needs to be a successful male, or whatever a paraphrase of the Gillette kind of positioning might be. So there is too much choice quite often. We deselect if we don't have help. And for those of you who have just pictured your local Tesco's, in your summer holidays, if you're in Italy or in France or in Spain or wherever it is, go into the supermarket and try and shop an unfamiliar supermarket and figure out how long it takes you. It'll take you twice as long and you'll come out exhausted because you have to read every brand, try and understand every, you know. I went in there with my kids when they were young and there was baby food that I'd never heard of. Is this picture of a horse actually because it has horse meat in it, or is that the logo? I couldn't work it out. Whereas cow and gate, straight in the basket, don't have to think. Cognitive overload. It's exhausting shopping unfamiliar and busy spaces. And our worlds are, of course, this is just a microcosm of the world in which we live in. And then, choice. We kind of assume that the broad context is good for making choices, but increasingly we're kind of not so sure that that's right. You know, when we're fed bogus information, under what circumstances are we really making sound choices? Brexit, for example, with apologies to anyone that may find... I don't want to get into that argument. Let's not have that tonight. And this is something that is a real eye-opener for me. This is something called the Edelman Trust Barometer. I don't know if anyone's come across this. This is a piece of research that PR company Edelman do every year. And essentially what they do is they create this index out of 100. So there's a global number. And each year that has been in decline. It's the degree to which we trust the institutions that surround us. And it has been in decline globally. But look at where it's in decline. And is it any surprise, given the kind of events that we see today in the US, that the US is the bottom of the list in terms of trust of the and that'll be commercial institutions, public sector, government, celebrities, all the institutions that kind of surround us. We don't trust them as much. So exercising choice in this context is becoming increasingly difficult. So a brand is a reason to choose. It's becoming a little bit more of an interesting concept about choice and the reasons we make the choice. And by the way, anyone who's interested in cognitive science, our ability to actually make rational choice is pretty suspect as well. We are creatures full of cognitive bias. And don't worry if you can't actually read that chart. You're not meant to. The list is too long for this evening about the imperfections we have and the cognitive biases that we have as individuals that compromise our ability to choose in a straightforward sense. So we like to think we're nice sort of rational beings with a little bit of emotion chucked in. The evidence suggests it's actually the other way around. We're intrinsically emotional and intuitive beings that work very hard against that and put in a little bit of rationality from time to time if we're lucky. So this is also becoming widely recognized. So this was last year's, one of the Nobel Prize winners, wasn't he? Richard Thaler. So he's a leading light in behavioral science. He wrote a book called Nudge and has sort of provoked a whole load of thinking around little nudges. If you come across, there's a very interesting organization called the Behavioral Insights Team, used to be called the Nudge Units, come out of the Cabinet Office. They're doing incredible work with behavioral psychology and public policy and how we can be encouraged to do things we know are good for us and we ought to be doing, but in spite of ourselves, we eat bad food and don't do enough exercise and don't pay our bills on time and all those kind of things. So he said we do not play chess as if we were a grandmaster, invest as if we were Warren Buffett, or cook like an Iron Chef. It's more likely that we cook like Warren Buffett, who loves to eat at Dairy Queen. And in case you don't know what Dairy Queen is, that was their website yesterday, just to kind of give you a bit of a picture. it's not good, is the point. So we'll come back to Warren Buffett a bit later. So we are not good choice makers, I guess is the point, despite the fact that we'd like to think that we are, that we'd like to think of ourselves as rational creatures. And I'm sorry to say that you may be thinking, yes, 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 but we're different in this room, that the super smart people that John promised were going to turn up were the exceptions to the imperfections that are out there in wider society. Because we asked you a simple question in the survey, and for those of you that filled it in, thank you very much. And we asked, as the weather warms up, unfortunately it's taken a bit of a dip today, but as the weather warms up, we'll need to cool down. Below is an image and a description of a product from Dyson. How much would you be prepared to pay for it? And what you didn't know when you completed this exercise was that there was actually two paths. We were giving you some A/B testing. And what we did was half of you got to see the picture on the right, which has a technical claim. And then you were asked to say how much would you pay for it. And half of you got to respond to the question on the right. So a much more sort of lifestyle, emotive kind of image. And then you were asked to price, or to state how much you'd be prepared to pay, I should say, for the image. Now, before I reveal the answers, I did exactly the same exercise with the P&G alumni. There were 800 of them in the room. And so I can compare your response to theirs, which is eye-opening in and of itself. So that was the response. So there is a 39% premium that you are responding to simply on the basis of the way that product is being presented to you. So tell me now that you are rational decision makers simply on the basis of there's the product, I will pay a certain amount of price. You are influenced in so many ways, and ways that you're barely aware of. So the answer here, by the way, the comparison to P&G, if you're interested, my conclusion is that you lot are a lot tighter than the good folks in Geneva, because they were, I think they were 105 quid on the left, although it was euros, it was 130, 105 pounds on the left, and it was more like a 60% premium on the right. And these are largely professional brand marketers, a lot of them. I mean, you get 800 ex-P&Gers in the room, they know a thing or two about brands, and in spite of that, they were as susceptible to this, even more so, arguably, than you were. So we are not as rational as we would like to think. So this issue about choice, brands as the reason to choose, all of this becomes more complicated to consider as we start to think about some of these broader factors. So you're all business students, or largely business students. So what on earth does this all mean for business? How does this kind of contribute? If you're going to be in the boardroom, how should you really be thinking about this from a sort of financial contribution point of view? And this is where I think there has been a lot of progress in recent years, but there is still some work to be done. There are lots of ways in which brands can be valuable to owners. So this is not a definitive list, but just some examples here. So price elasticity, I'm using phrases which I'm sure have come up in your courses over the last few weeks. Price elasticity and margin protection, so the FT can kind of increase its prices without there being a noticeable dip down in sales. Virgin, John, you mentioned this one, stretching into new business. That's part of the strength of the Virgin brand. It really can go into adjacent and even non-adjacent categories. Protection from commoditization. I mean, if ever there was a commodity, water surely is it, and yet Evian manages to get us to willingly pay a significant premium over tap. Lego, a great example of loyalty and retention. The customers love Lego so much that they actually participate for free in product design. I mean, think of that. If majority, think of that, Isaac. If you get your customers to actually design your products for you, where would you?
Wouldn't be very good.
Well, there would be some. That's another matter. Reduced cost of customer acquisition. Apple, they just have to launch a product and people buy it. I mean, of course, if you're launching a rubbish product, that's another matter. But they don't have to market, they don't have to advertise themselves significantly as a result of the strength of their brand, or even licensing and royalty revenues. Harley Davidson, obviously very successful in motorbikes, but my God, the licensing revenue they get. Fashion brands make masses of money out of licensing, much more so than they do actual from the direct sales of their own branded, their own manufactured products for many of them. So there's all sorts of ways in which brands can be valuable to business owners. So the question, okay, well that's great. How much value? I mean, we're talking about intangibles here, and it's quite difficult to think about intangibles in terms of assets that are valuable. Fortunately, Brand Z are one of a number of organisations that have kind of done the hard work for us. And you'll be pleased to hear that I can do a little bit of a zoom on the top 10. That is the top 10 most valuable brands according to Brand Z. Now, Interbrand do something similar. I used to work at Interbrand. Their list is a little bit different. That's not the point. Let's not argue about how many billions of dollars difference is there. The point here is that these assets are enormously valuable. Google is a $245 billion asset. The brand, not the business. And look what we've got here as well. Microsoft becoming almost, well, it's a majority B2B business. Amazon's making a lot of money in AWS on B2B. IBM, exclusively B2B these days. These are not just consumer brands that are hugely valuable as well. These are B2B brands. So these things which are kind of difficult to understand, to define, that are conceptually difficult to kind of manage and exercise against the context of choice making, which is kind of tricky for us to get our heads around and even sort of pin down. These are still nonetheless enormously valuable assets to businesses they contribute. And we asked you as well, again, those people who completed the survey, thank you very much. We asked this question: approximately what % of the value of the corporate balance sheets of companies on the FTSE 250 do you think are attributable to intangible assets like brands? So to be clear, intangible assets, brands aren't the only intangible assets that will be on that balance sheet, but they are part and parcel of intangible assets. So you responded to this, and you said, on average, I should say, it's quite a spread on this one. But on average, that's nearly half the value of the FTSE 250 can be attributed to intangible assets. That's quite a high number. The real answer is around 80%. Now, I have to confess at this point, when I set this question up, I thought I actually had the data, and I've had to kind of infer the data a little bit. So it's a kind of plus minus, but it's still a there or thereabouts. And let me just kind of illustrate with a little bit more empirical evidence why one can kind of think about this significant number. This has been a major shift in business over the last 30 years, from tangible assets to intangible assets. This is a list put together by an outfit called Brand Finance, and what they do is they look at the total intangible value of a number of firms. It's a longer list than this. And then they look at the total intangible value as a proportion of the enterprise value of the company. And again, for those of you at the back, I've just done a little zoom here. Look at those numbers. 80%, 90%, 110, 89%. Berkshire Hathaway's anomaly at 44%. That's quite low. But average that out, it's 80s, 90s. The percentage of the enterprise value of a lot of these firms is all about intangibles. It's not about the bricks and mortar. It's not about the hardware. It's about intangible assets. It's about IP. It's about knowledge. It's about patents. It's about copyright. It's about trademarks. It's about brands. It's about all these kind of intangibles that are contributing to the corporate value. And I did say that we wouldn't leave Warren Buffett in Dairy Queen on his own. Warren Buffett knows as well as anyone the value, and he's on record saying brand is amongst the most valuable financial assets of modern corporations. So again, here we are in Leeds Business School. Are we teaching brands? No, we're not. I mean, these are the most valuable financial assets, and yet we're not really doing as much as we could be to be thinking about them and, in fact, learning how to manage them. So, final question that we asked you. I kind of worded this in the negative. So, okay, great. So brands are valuable. Yes, Fred. But what happens in a downturn? We've been through one of those in the last 10 years. Surely non-branded businesses do better in an economic downturn. I asked you that question. To what extent did you agree? And this was the picture. So actually, bit of a spread, but by and large, a bit more agreement than disagreement. So you're basically, what I took from this was you were saying that when times get tough, people stop buying brands and they buy kind of unbranded, in an unbranded way, as it were. So, I mean, I can understand the logic for thinking about that. The evidence isn't quite so straightforward. So I've got two charts for you. This is something that Interbrand release. It's a couple of years old now, but you can see the point here. And basically what they do is they take the BGB 100, which is their best global brands study, and they take the publicly listed companies that are on that list, and they buy them virtually in year one. And then in year two, they sell them, and then they buy again. If some brands have dropped out, they get eliminated. If some brands have come in, they get added. But they treat it like as a portfolio manager would, just buying and selling as a form of index. What happens when compared to the S&P 500 and the MSCI World Index as well is, it starts to map, it begins to kind of take away. But what I think is particularly interesting is it dips down, 2008 when the recession started to hit. But look at the speed with which it came out. And this is something that I've noticed with a lot of my clients as well. They're in a better position to come out of downturns. So you're partly right, maybe. I'd give you that credit. That do unbranded businesses fare better? I'm not sure there's any evidence, certainly as you look at this, that they do any better or any worse. But I would contend they do a lot. Branded businesses do a lot better as things start to turn, and they can really push off and accelerate away from businesses that are less strongly branded. Or, of course, there will be branded businesses in those indices, but there'll be less strongly branded businesses. And this was Brand Z. I mentioned them a bit earlier. This is their equivalent of it. They start a little later in 2007, and it goes on to 2017. But you can see the same effect. That the blue goes down, it doesn't dip as far as the other indices, but it comes out much more quickly. So if you are the CEO of a company in however many years' time, and you are sitting on a strong brand or a strong portfolio of brands, and a recession hits, manage those brands. You'll come out of that recession much better than your competitors. That's the lesson here. So I promised with this presentation that it would be about brands, business, and BS. I had to abbreviate it. John was concerned about your sensitivities in the room. That's right. And I'm not going to, hopefully what we've talked about here are some of the myths that you might have brought into the room. Madam, we talked about one of those as we were outside. And that we're starting to dispel them. And 5 that I expected that we would have dispelled is, firstly, go back to that Starbucks point, and the gentleman at the back there, a brand as a logo. I hear that all the time. Still, I would have thought that after 20 plus years in this industry that people would have got over that. But still, I'll share an anecdote. I was with a Wharton MBA he's around about 30, and he said, "Oh, you're a brand consultant, Fred. What do you think of our brand?" He works in insurance, reinsurance, one of the big 3. And he got his phone out and he showed me the logo. And after I'd got over the instinct that I wanted to throttle him, I had to sit down for 10 minutes and explain, and he was mortified. He said, "I get it. I feel embarrassed I asked you such a sort of superficial question." But it happens even from the byproducts of the best business schools in the world. So obviously Leeds is stealing a march on Wharton. Well done. 2, the brands are mainly created through advertising. Again, think about that sort of holistic view, and think about the realities that if it's you don't just want to be promised something. It's as much about what businesses and brands do as what they say, and you will be found out in an instant in a world of social media if what you do does not align to what you promise that you're going to do. So it's about the experience, not just about communications. I hope that you will, if there's one thing that you leave this room as the future CEOs of the world, that you will understand that the brand is an asset, not a cost. But that is not a universal view in the boardrooms of the world. So I would contend that it's an asset and a valuable asset, and one that ought to be treated as such. And think about that list again. There was IBM. SAP was in the top 20. Microsoft, Amazon. Brands are not just B2C constructs. It's not just for consumers. In fact, there's a lot of evidence to say that their effect is more pronounced in business-to-business context because of the risks involved. The kind of shorthand for this is you never get fired for hiring blank. And that's a B2B kind of construct, if you like. And in that blank, insert the strong brand. SAP, unfortunately. Even though the world knows they're a little bit patchy, they will always win because you never get fired for hiring SAP. I'm saying that to Isaac at the back there, he knows. I'm feeling his pain. And I think importantly is the point that brands are not just the preserve of the marketing department. This is a strategic asset. If all those strong brands have as their kind of lead brand advocate the CEO or someone equivalent to the CEO, Jeff Bezos gets the importance of the Amazon brand, not just in terms of how it interacts with the customers, but how it drives innovation behavior in the business, how it allows them to go into all sorts of new categories because of its sort of Virgin-like stretch. He gets that as much as anyone else. So it's just not the preserve of the marketing department. It's not about communications. So 5 bits of BS, which I hope are no longer BS today. We'll have some questions in a minute. I said that there was a lot that I wasn't going to talk about today. So if you need a slide, a checklist, if you're super interested in this subject, as I hope you will be as a result of tonight, there's all sorts of things that you can kind of be looking to study, ranging from brand strategy, architecture, identity. We talked about look and feel. I can't remember who it was over here. I think it was you, madam, wasn't it? Yeah. Part of it, but not the whole part. So certainly part of it. Brand experience, what does that mean? Going down through how do you measure it? They're tough things to measure. Managing it, licensing it, protection. There's a big legal side to it. Innovation. How does P&G gets this? They can invent all sorts of things for Gillette, but what's a Gillette innovation? And how's that different from a Wilkinson innovation or a Braun innovation? They own Braun, by the way. They're 2 quite different things. All sorts of things that we could be talking about, but that's for another time. But what I did want to finish with, just to kind of leave us on a light-hearted note, this was a letter I got last week, and this is a little bit of the BS, if I can be so bold. Nothing until sensibilities noted, John, and it's. Charles Tyrwhitt. Anyone know Charles Tyrwhitt's shirt? I'm wearing a Charles Tyrwhitt shirt, so doing very well. Mail order as they started out, big online. They've got a couple of stores now as well. But yes, so this letter came through, and if you're a customer, you may well have got this as well. Dear Mr. Burt, you are always on my mind, even though I don't expect you to return the compliment. I confess that I like to imagine what you're wearing as you read my letter, evidently in an entirely proper way. Have I caught you in the kitchen in your pyjamas? Perhaps relaxed in a puppy-tooth slim-fit cutaway, that's a shirt for those of you who don't know, or fully suited and booted, having just buttoned one of our crisp square double cuffs, that's another shirt. My hopes are soaring. Everything we do for you. I'm singing as I write. You are one of our most precious customers, and I'd like to say thank you. And not only are we the home of the proper shirt, we're the home of the proper thank you. That's why you'll find a voucher nestled freshly as a newly laid egg within this envelope. Consider this an ice-breaking gesture from a friend you haven't seen in a while, but who hasn't forgotten you. It will make me immensely happy if you spend this on something you love, anything you want, brackets as long as it's a shirt. And if you change your mind, you can send it back to me. Because what matters to me is to make you happy, because whichever Charles Tyrwhitt clothes you are wearing, that is what you make me. Nick Wheeler, who's Nicholas Charles Tyrwhitt Wheeler, the founder. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a thick-skinned kind of bloke. That's just creepy. And I mean, when I look at that from a professional point of view as well, I'm just thinking, well, you know, my dad is a customer of that. He's going to read that and actually be straightforwardly offended and just not understand it. And you know, I know what's happened here. That the CEO or the founder has said, "Don't worry, marketing director, I've got this one. we're going to be a little bit wacky with our tone of voice, and we're going to disrupt, and we're going to get the attention, and we're going to kind of put this out." And it just, you know, that is just wrong. I think we can all kind of feel that as just being straightforwardly wrong. Anyway, I put that on my social media feed, and I've got record responses as a result of it on Friday night. 7,500 people have kind of viewed that and commented on it. But if you want an example of with apologies to Charles Tyrwhitt, if you're going to be watching this video, I'm sorry, but that's just a misstep. You know, there's a lot of BS that goes out there. If you understand your brand, understand your customer, you don't make missteps like that. That's just a kind of lack of focus. So there's a lot of BS out there. Hopefully, I've given you some inspiration and some guidance this evening, and I hope I'm on time as well, a little bit over maybe. Definitely hoping we're going to get some super smart, super intelligent questions from the super smart, super intelligent people in the room. So thank you very much.